When Jessa Duggar and Ben Seewald first began their courtship, her family was initially wary of him. The Duggars, known for their strong family bonds and deeply rooted values, had always played an active role in their children's romantic relationships. As a result, any new suitor entering their world was met with close scrutiny. Ben, who came from a different background and had not grown up within the same conservative, faith-driven lifestyle as the Duggars, immediately stood out. His personality, demeanor, and even his appearance were contrasted against the familiar traits of the men the Duggars typically associated with. While Ben was respectful and kind, he did not fit the mold of what the family had expected or envisioned for Jessa. This initial disconnect fueled a sense of suspicion among some family members, particularly those closest to Jessa, such as her parents and siblings. The differences between Ben and the Duggars extended beyond just upbringing. His more relaxed and easygoing nature clashed with the structured, disciplined environment that defined the Duggar household. Some family members found it difficult to understand how someone so seemingly laid back could be a good match for Jessa, who had been raised with strict expectations and a firm sense of duty. Additionally, because Ben had lived independently before meeting Jessa, there were concerns about whether he would fully align with the family's religious beliefs and way of life. These uncertainties led to quiet skepticism behind closed doors, with some relatives expressing doubts about whether Ben was truly the right person for Jessa. Despite these reservations, however, many also acknowledged that only time would tell if their suspicions were warranted. Ben Seewald's more independent and free-spirited nature set him apart from the tightly knit, highly structured Duggar household. Unlike Jessa, who had been raised with strict expectations and a regimented daily routine, Ben had spent years living on his own, managing his own schedule and making decisions without needing to consult a large family network. This difference in lifestyle became apparent early on, particularly in the way he approached responsibilities and decision-making. For instance, while the Duggars valued promptness, orderliness, and adherence to plans, Ben was often more spontaneous and flexible, which sometimes led to misunderstandings or frustration. During visits to the Duggar home, Jessa's family observed how Ben handled situations differently, whether it was his approach to work, personal habits, or even small interactions with others. One notable example occurred when Ben arrived late for a family gathering, something that rarely happened in the Duggar household, where punctuality was emphasized. Though he had a reasonable explanation, the delay was seen by some as a sign of unreliability or a lack of seriousness. Similarly, his tendency to take a more casual approach to conversations, often using humor or sarcasm, contrasted with the Duggars' preference for directness and sincerity. Some family members interpreted this as a lack of respect or maturity, further fueling their skepticism. Even his fashion choices and relaxed body language stood out compared to the more formal and composed demeanor of Jessa's siblings and parents. These small but consistent differences created a growing sense of unease among certain family members, who questioned whether Ben's personality was truly compatible with Jessa's upbringing and long-term goals. Another major concern for Jessa's family was the difference in Ben's religious background and how seriously he took his faith. The Duggars were deeply rooted in a conservative Christian worldview, adhering to specific beliefs and practices that shaped every aspect of their lives, from how they raised their children to how they interacted with the outside world. Jessa had been brought up in an environment where daily devotions, church attendance, and strict moral codes were non-negotiable, and her future spouse was expected to share these convictions. However, Ben had not been raised in the same tradition, and while he identified as a Christian, his spiritual journey and level of devotion did not initially align with the expectations of Jessa's family. This discrepancy became a point of discussion among family members, particularly Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, who had always emphasized the importance of shared faith in marriage. They wanted to ensure that Jessa's husband would uphold the same biblical principles that had guided their family for years. Some relatives expressed concerns that Ben might not fully understand or appreciate the depth of Jessa's religious upbringing, leading to potential conflicts in the future. Others worried that he might not be willing to adopt the Duggars' way of life, especially regarding family dynamics, parenting philosophies, and even financial decisions, all of which were closely tied to their faith. These concerns were not unfounded, as past experiences had shown that differing religious views could lead to difficulties in relationships. The Duggars had seen other couples struggle when one partner did not share the same foundational beliefs, and they feared that Jessa and Ben could face similar challenges. While Ben was respectful of the Duggars' traditions, his more individualistic approach to faith made some family members question whether he would ultimately support the lifestyle they believed was best for Jessa. These worries contributed to the overall sense of apprehension surrounding the relationship, reinforcing the idea that Ben might not be the ideal match for Jessa in the eyes of her family. Jessa's family also struggled to determine whether Ben was genuinely committed to her or simply going through the motions of courtship. In a family where relationships followed a very structured path, often involving chaperone dates, parental involvement, and clear intentions, Ben's approach seemed less conventional. He did not immediately display the same eagerness or urgency that Jessa's siblings had shown when pursuing their spouses, which led some family members to question his level of interest. Unlike previous suitors who had quickly integrated into the family dynamic, Ben remained somewhat distant, maintaining his independence rather than fully embracing the Duggar way of life. This perceived detachment was particularly noticeable in how he handled communication and planning. While Jessa's family expected frequent updates and clear steps forward in the relationship, Ben was more reserved, sometimes leaving Jessa waiting for responses or failing to follow through on commitments. His reluctance to make firm plans or express definitive intentions fueled speculation among Jessa's siblings and parents, who wondered if he was serious about marrying her. Some relatives recalled instances where Ben hesitated to confirm visits or postpone discussions about the future, which only deepened their doubts. Additionally, his career aspirations and personal goals seemed at odds with the traditional expectations Jessa's family had for a son-in-law. While the Duggars valued stability and a strong work ethic, Ben's interests in entrepreneurship and creative ventures appeared unpredictable by comparison. To some, this suggested that he was not fully ready to settle down or commit to the responsibilities of married life. These uncertainties led Jessa's family to remain cautious, unsure whether Ben was truly invested in building a future with her or merely exploring the relationship without a clear plan. Over time, Jessa's family began to warm up to Ben Seewald as they witnessed his genuine efforts to integrate into their lives and demonstrate his commitment to Jessa. One of the most significant turning points was Ben's willingness to embrace the Duggars' values and traditions, even when they differed from his own upbringing. He started attending church services regularly, actively participating in family gatherings, and showing respect for the structured routines that defined the Duggar household. His humility and openness to learning from Jessa's family helped ease some of the initial skepticism, proving that he was not resistant to their way of life, but rather eager to adapt. Ben also took deliberate steps to build trust with Jessa's parents, particularly Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, who held considerable influence over the family's perception of him. He engaged in meaningful conversations with them, sought their advice on various matters, and demonstrated a willingness to prioritize Jessa's well-being above his own desires. His consistent communication and transparency reassured the Duggars that he was serious about his relationship with Jessa and willing to navigate the challenges that came with joining such a large, tightly knit family. Perhaps most importantly, Ben proved his dedication to Jessa by taking concrete steps toward their future together. He pursued stable career opportunities, made efforts to spend quality time with her family, and gradually aligned his lifestyle with the expectations Jessa had been raised with. As these changes became evident, many of the initial doubts faded, and the Duggars began to see Ben not as an outsider, but as a devoted partner who truly cared for Jessa. Josh Duggar, once a prominent public figure due to his family's reality television show 19 Kids and Counting, is now at the center of a legal battle following his federal child pornography conviction. In 2021, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison after pleading guilty to possessing and receiving child exploitation material. His sentencing followed a highly publicized trial that reignited scrutiny over past allegations against him, including a previously undisclosed molestation case involving multiple underage girls in 2006. Now, with his appeal process underway, Duggar has taken an unusual legal step, formally requesting that the court appoint him an attorney to assist in overturning his sentence. This request, filed with the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Arkansas, signals Duggar's acknowledgement that he may not have the financial means to secure private legal representation for his appeal. While some might assume that a former reality TV personality would have significant resources, Duggar claims that his current financial situation prevents him from affording an attorney independently. His motion asserts that without court-appointed counsel, he would be unable to effectively challenge his conviction or sentence on appeal. If granted, this request would provide him with a government-funded attorney who could help identify legal errors in his original trial or sentencing process. The implications of this move are significant. A successful appeal could lead to a reduced sentence or even a retrial, depending on whether appellate courts find procedural mistakes or constitutional violations in his case. However, given the severity of his crime and the overwhelming evidence presented during his trial, overturning his conviction remains a formidable challenge. Still, by seeking appointed counsel, Duggar is positioning himself to exhaust all available legal avenues in his effort to contest his sentence. In the United States judicial system, the right to legal representation is a fundamental component of due process, particularly in criminal cases. This principle is enshrined in the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees that individuals facing criminal charges have the right to counsel, regardless of their financial status. When a defendant cannot afford an attorney, the court is obligated to appoint one on their behalf, typically through a public defender's office or a privately retained attorney funded by the government. This ensures that all defendants, regardless of wealth, receive a fair trial and can adequately present their defense. However, while the right to appointed counsel applies primarily to the trial phase of a criminal case, it also extends to certain stages of the appeals process under specific circumstances. For an individual like Josh Duggar, who has already been convicted and sentenced, the right to court-appointed counsel does not automatically extend to the appellate stage unless certain conditions are met. According to federal law, indigent defendants have the right to appointed attorneys when appealing their convictions if they demonstrate both financial hardship and a legitimate basis for appeal. This means that simply being unable to afford a lawyer is not sufficient on its own. The defendant must also show that there is a reasonable argument for overturning their conviction or reducing their sentence. Courts evaluate these requests based on factors such as the complexity of the legal issues involved, potential errors in the trial process, and the likelihood that an attorney could significantly impact the outcome of the appeal. If Duggar successfully proves his inability to pay for legal representation and presents a plausible justification for challenging his sentence, the court may grant his request and assign him an attorney. However, if the court determines that he either has the financial means to hire his own lawyer or lacks a viable legal basis for appeal, his motion will be denied. Should that happen, Duggar would face two options: proceed pro se or attempt to raise funds to hire a private attorney. Representing oneself in a federal appeal is an extremely difficult task, as appellate procedures are complex and require a deep understanding of legal arguments, precedent, and procedural rules. Without experienced legal guidance, Duggar's chances of successfully overturning his conviction would be significantly diminished. In his formal motion requesting court-appointed counsel, Josh Duggar outlines his financial constraints, emphasizing that his current economic situation prevents him from securing private legal representation for his appeal. The filing details his income sources, asset holdings, and ongoing expenses, aiming to establish his eligibility for government-funded legal assistance. According to the motion, Duggar reports having no steady income since his incarceration, relying solely on sporadic earnings from prison labor, which amounts to minimal compensation. Additionally, he states that any prior savings or assets have been depleted due to legal fees incurred during his initial trial and other personal obligations. Duggar further explains that his family's financial stability has been severely impacted by the legal proceedings and his subsequent imprisonment. His wife, Anna Duggar, has publicly spoken about the difficulties of supporting their 5 children while managing mounting legal costs. The motion notes that despite efforts to seek financial support from extended family members and friends, there are no viable sources of funding available to cover the substantial costs associated with hiring a private attorney for a federal appeal. Given the complexity of appellate litigation and the high hourly rates charged by experienced appellate attorneys, Duggar argues that without court-appointed counsel, he would be unable to meaningfully challenge his conviction or sentence. Beyond financial hardship, Duggar's motion also highlights the complexity of the legal issues involved in his case, reinforcing the necessity of professional legal assistance. His appeal hinges on several potential grounds, including alleged procedural errors during sentencing and the possibility that his guilty plea was not fully informed or voluntary. These arguments require a thorough understanding of federal criminal procedure and appellate law, making self-representation an impractical option. By demonstrating both his inability to afford an attorney and the need for expert legal analysis, Duggar seeks to meet the legal standard required for court-appointed counsel in federal appeals. Josh Duggar's request for court-appointed counsel has sparked intense debate across media outlets, legal experts, and the general public. Given the nature of his crimes and the extensive media coverage surrounding his case, opinions on his legal maneuver have been sharply divided. Some critics argue that Duggar should not be granted additional legal benefits, especially considering the severity of his offense and the fact that he previously had access to legal representation during his trial. They contend that allowing him to receive government-funded legal aid for his appeal is unjust, particularly in light of the emotional and psychological harm caused to his victims. Victim advocacy groups have expressed concern that Duggar's continued legal battles could prolong trauma for those affected by his actions, emphasizing the importance of prioritizing justice over leniency for individuals convicted of child exploitation crimes. Conversely, legal analysts have pointed out that Duggar's request is procedurally valid and aligns with established legal principles. Under federal law, defendants who meet the criteria for indigency are entitled to court-appointed counsel during the appellate process, regardless of the nature of their crime. Some legal experts argue that denying Duggar this right could set a problematic precedent, undermining the integrity of the justice system by suggesting that certain individuals are not entitled to due process based on public sentiment. Additionally, discussions have emerged regarding the broader implications of this case for the rights of incarcerated individuals seeking to appeal their sentences. While Duggar's crimes are widely condemned, legal professionals caution against allowing public outrage to influence judicial decisions, stressing that every defendant deserves the opportunity to challenge their conviction within the bounds of the law. Media coverage of Duggar's motion has largely reflected these contrasting viewpoints, with news outlets highlighting both the controversy surrounding his request and the legal rationale behind it. Some commentators have framed the issue as a test of the fairness and consistency of the American legal system, questioning whether all defendants, regardless of public perception, should have equal access to legal recourse. Others have focused on the broader societal implications, debating whether individuals convicted of heinous crimes should be allowed to use taxpayer-funded resources to fight their sentences. As the court weighs Duggar's motion, these discussions continue to shape public discourse on the intersection of legal rights, criminal justice, and media influence. If the court grants Josh Duggar's request for court-appointed counsel, he will gain access to a legal professional who can meticulously review his case for potential errors that could serve as grounds for appeal. Federal appellate proceedings typically involve scrutinizing the trial court's handling of evidence, jury instructions, sentencing guidelines, and procedural compliance with constitutional protections. An appointed attorney could explore various legal arguments, such as whether Duggar's guilty plea was made under duress, whether there were inconsistencies in the prosecution's presentation of evidence, or whether sentencing enhancements were applied improperly. However, overturning a conviction in federal court is a formidable challenge, particularly in cases where the defendant entered a guilty plea. Unlike trials, where the burden of proof rests entirely on the prosecution, guilty pleas significantly limit the scope of appellate review, as defendants typically waive many constitutional challenges when admitting guilt. Even if Duggar's legal team identifies potential issues, appellate courts generally defer to the trial court's discretion unless clear legal errors or constitutional violations are demonstrated. For instance, if Duggar's attorneys argue that his guilty plea was not fully informed or voluntary, they would need to prove that he did not understand the consequences of his plea or that external pressures influenced his decision. Another possible avenue involves challenging the application of sentencing guidelines, particularly the enhancements imposed due to his possession of child pornography and prior history. If the court finds that these enhancements were improperly calculated or lacked sufficient evidentiary support, Duggar's sentence could be reduced. However, given the strength of the evidence against him and the structured nature of federal sentencing laws, a full reversal of his conviction remains unlikely. Should the court deny Duggar's motion for appointed counsel, he would face significant obstacles in pursuing an effective appeal. Without experienced legal representation, navigating the complexities of federal appellate law would be exceedingly difficult, increasing the likelihood that any appeal would be dismissed or fail to secure meaningful relief. Alternatively, if Duggar attempts to represent himself, his arguments may lack the legal precision necessary to persuade appellate judges. Ultimately, the court's decision on his request will determine the viability of his appeal and the extent to which he can legally challenge his conviction and sentence. Josh Duggar's request for court-appointed counsel raises important questions about the accessibility of legal representation in criminal appeals, particularly for defendants who may not have the financial resources to navigate the appellate process independently. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to legal counsel, but this protection primarily applies to the trial stage of a criminal case. At the appellate level, the right to appointed counsel is more limited and contingent upon demonstrating both indigency and a legitimate legal basis for appeal. Duggar's case serves as a reminder that while the legal system provides mechanisms to ensure fair treatment for all defendants, these protections do not always extend beyond the trial phase without meeting strict criteria. This situation underscores the broader challenges faced by incarcerated individuals seeking to appeal their convictions. Many defendants, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, struggle to obtain adequate legal assistance after sentencing, often due to financial constraints or the complexities of appellate law. The requirement to prove both financial hardship and a viable legal argument for appeal creates a significant barrier, potentially leaving some individuals without meaningful recourse if their cases contain procedural errors or constitutional violations. Furthermore, representing oneself in an appeal process known as proceeding is an arduous task that demands familiarity with intricate legal standards, procedural rules, and precedents. Without proper legal guidance, even meritorious appeals may fail due to technical deficiencies or insufficiently articulated arguments. Duggar's case also highlights the tension between ensuring due process and public perceptions of justice. While legal experts emphasize that all defendants, regardless of their crimes, deserve the opportunity to challenge their convictions, public opinion often influences how these legal principles are viewed in high-profile cases. The debate surrounding Duggar's motion reflects broader concerns about the role of taxpayer-funded legal aid in cases involving severe crimes. However, legal scholars caution against allowing public sentiment to dictate access to legal recourse, arguing that maintaining procedural fairness is essential to upholding the integrity of the justice system. Ultimately, Duggar's request serves as a case study in the complexities of appellate rights, illustrating the delicate balance between legal principles and societal expectations in the criminal justice process. As Josh Duggar's motion for court-appointed counsel moves forward, the case continues to highlight the intricate relationship between legal rights, public sentiment, and the judicial process. Regardless of the severity of his crime, Duggar, like all defendants, retains the legal right to pursue an appeal under the framework of due process. The court's decision on his request will not only determine the trajectory of his legal battle, but also serve as a reaffirmation or potential challenge to the principles governing access to legal representation in post-conviction proceedings. Whether the court grants or denies his motion, the case underscores the necessity of maintaining procedural fairness, even in instances where public opinion strongly opposes a defendant's efforts to seek legal recourse. From a legal standpoint, Duggar's appeal represents a broader discussion about the accessibility of justice for all individuals, regardless of financial means or the nature of their offenses. While the public may view his request with skepticism, the legal system operates under the premise that every defendant deserves the opportunity to challenge their conviction or sentence within the bounds of the law. This principle is vital to ensuring that wrongful convictions are corrected and that sentencing disparities are addressed through appropriate legal channels. At the same time, the intense media scrutiny surrounding Duggar's case illustrates how high-profile criminal defendants often face heightened legal and social challenges, with their appeals becoming focal points for debates on justice, rehabilitation, and accountability. Ultimately, Duggar's pursuit of court-appointed counsel reinforces the idea that the legal system must remain impartial, applying consistent standards regardless of public perception. As the court deliberates on his motion, the outcome will not only affect his personal legal fate, but also contribute to the ongoing discourse on the rights of incarcerated individuals seeking appellate review. Whether his appeal proceeds with or without appointed counsel, the case serves as a testament to the enduring importance of legal representation in upholding the rule of law.